Welcome to Why Use Agile. In this session, we will discuss why the Agile methodology was selected as the basis for delivering projects with OutSystems. In this session, we'll answer the question, why Agile? We'll discuss the two Agile manifestos that provide guiding principles for this approach, the Manifesto for Agile Software Development and the Manifesto for Software Craftsmanship. Given all of that motivation and guidance, we'll also look at how to work in an agile way. Today, the user is king, and they can have very high expectations. Over time, people have been getting closer to technology, to the point where the normal citizen has become a daily consumer of technology, and a very savvy one at that. End users feel that they know best, and they demand to be heard. So from a solution delivery perspective, it's increasingly often the case that these key users are the ones deciding the go, no-go. Agile was designed to work closely with the end users in order to get early feedback from them during the development process, and then iteratively enhance a solution based on what is most valuable to them. The Agile approach provides a stark contrast to the waterfall methods of the past. Waterfall methods were based on countless meetings and miles of documentation, which made it difficult to cope with the demands and the pace of the world today. The competitive landscape of business today can be very aggressive in its time to market and require quicker responses to change in the end user's perception of value. So ensuring that the apps we're building and delivering are actually driven by the end user's perspective of value is now key for the survival of any company. So, what are the fundamental goals of solution delivery, and why should we choose an agile approach to address them? Well, there's an interesting quote from Darwin about natural selection which sort of applies. It's not the strongest of species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. So from a Darwinistic perspective, Agile principles seem to be on the right path as they address the three fundamental goals of today's solution delivery: fast time to market, ability to respond to change, and being driven by the business value. Now, back in the beginning of 2001, a small group of people got together to try to come up with a set of core values that are common to successful delivery teams and their projects. They documented these values and wrote the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. It starts with, "We are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it." The group wanted people to know that this was based on real experience and that they wanted to help others. And it had quite an impact as Kent Beck, Martin Fowler, and many other thought leaders of the time were part of this group. The manifesto and its principles are truly important in our practice as they provide a clear framework to follow and they convey the collaboration and constructive mindset that's so important. Here are some of the comparisons they created to try to describe these principles. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Now, this is not to say that processes and tools aren't important, but we should focus on the importance of the team, on the collaboration between team members, and on working together toward a single and shared purpose. The discussions, discovery, and resulting team learning are just as important as the solution that's being built. Working software over comprehensive documentation. While important, documentation is not a goal per se. It's just a means to an end. Unfortunately, tons of documentation for a solution does not imply high quality, and sometimes the need for that much documentation actually implies the opposite. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. In this case, no one's saying that we don't need contracts and that all collaboration can be informal, but this comparison describes the mindset that's necessary to be able to respond to change, ensuring that the final solution fits the business need. And because change is always going to occur, responding to change should be more important than following a plan. Now, iteration by iteration, while the solution's being built, The key users are experiencing and providing feedback about it. This allows the users' needs to be better understood than they are at the start of the project. And this often results in changes to the goal of the project because the extra details or different perceptions of what represents the most value to the business user has changed. No doubt, this change should not only be expected, but actually embraced, as it will ensure better value and higher adoption. In 2009, the Manifesto for Software Craftsmanship tried to reinforce certain aspects of the original principles while highlighting the key traits software professionals aspire to, which are not only working software, but also well-crafted software. And that means focusing on the design and technical quality. Not simply responding to change, but actually doing it with a focus on steadily adding value. Not only individuals and interactions, but also a community of professionals. And not only customer collaboration, but also productive partnerships, highlighting how the relationship between these parties should be viewed and nurtured. Now, all of this sounds great. So to be fair, let's also focus on a few of the pitfalls that can occur when people abuse Agile, which we'll refer to as avoiding fragile. So well-crafted software over comprehensive documentation, but it needs to be centered around clearly written user stories. Everything that should be implemented should be clearly stated in the user story and its related acceptance criteria. Being responsive to change and always focusing on adding value is good, but we're also following a high-level plan, and the iteration scope is sacred and must remain intact. In fact, iteration scope should be viewed as an agreement, where the delivery team commits to deliver the agreed-upon scope, and the customer agrees and commits that the scope definition is sufficient to mitigate the risk of change requests that could interrupt the iteration. We also need to follow a well-structured process. It's not by chance that we'll get all the flexibility that Agile can get us. We can achieve it, but we need to follow a structured plan. And a fully productive partnership with the customer, but paying close attention to very clearly managing expectations and assuring alignment when change does come, and assuring those changes can be accommodated directly in the existing time box. So let's do a quick comparison of Agile and Waterfall. They both follow the same kind of delivery stages: requirements, design, implementation, testing, and then deployment. However, they have very different approaches to these stages. Plenty of software, great software, and lousy software as well, has been built over the years. So while Waterfall is plan-driven, each stage generally finishes before the next one can begin, according to some plan that is mostly defined at the very start of the project. Agile is value-driven, going through several iterations, sometimes called sprints, and each sprint comprised of the stages we just described, but with a list of deliverables planned for each sprint. The deliverables are prioritized by business value as determined by the customer. Also, users can provide feedback about the solution at the end of each sprint, thus keeping the solution closely aligned with their needs. It's also important to emphasize that Agile iterations are meant not to be like this, but like this. And that's to say that Agile aims to deliver value to user at the end of each iteration, meaning that not only mere parts or disconnected components of the solution are delivered, but rather a piece of functioning software that's useful, testable, and has some value. So what is working in an Agile way? Well, let's start off by defining a time box or project budget. Usually this is defined from an initial sizing, which should include all the initial requirements, assumptions, constraints, and objectives. Basically, all the knowledge gathered at the start of the project. This initial sizing should also take into consideration that most gathered knowledge will be at a high level, and that more details will be incorporated during the project. This resulting time box should be kept frozen until the end of the project, allowing for more accurate cost estimation and a plan for time to market. The next step is to assign features to specific iterations. To do this, we should categorize and prioritize all of the requested features. The top priority features, often called must-haves, should be the ones that are the most important, provide the most business value, or are a core piece of functionality. After the must-haves, we determine the things we should have, and then finally the could-haves, which are also referred to as nice-to-haves. While prioritizing, we should also take into account any dependencies between features. This may potentially raise the priority of less important features. Now, once the prioritization is complete, we can sort all the features and assign them to specific iterations within the time box. Iteration lengths are fixed and not flexible in any way, meaning that iterations end regardless of whether or not the assigned work is complete. Now, at the end of the prioritization, the first iterations should be covering the top priority features. The last iterations will include the least important features. So even at this stage in the project, we can perform a simple health check or sanity check. A basic rule of thumb tells us that must-haves should correspond to roughly 60% of our effort, should-haves another 20%, and could-haves another 20%. This way, there's a low risk of having to move important features out of the current release. When must-haves are higher than 60% of all the features, it indicates the need to discuss and review the reason for these priorities. Because if everything is important, then nothing's really important. Now, if you're listening closely, you may have noticed that I mentioned that features can be moved out of the current release. Let's look at why that might happen. Once iterative development starts, at the end of each iteration, a demo is performed for the users to allow them to provide feedback. This feedback must be handled to maintain alignment with the business needs. Handling the feedback may require minor changes to the existing features, or larger changes, like adding new features. Minor changes can usually be addressed in the next iteration, while new features need to undergo the same prioritization process that we just discussed. If the new features have higher value than the existing ones, the existing features should be moved to a future release. Otherwise, the new features have less value than the existing ones, and they should be moved to a future release. Usually, the features left out will be nice-to-haves, and therefore the entry of any new features provide more value, which is completely appropriate. This reprioritization process also allows new features to be included while keeping the time box frozen. And last but not least, having key users provide their feedback during the demo at the end of each iteration is great, and it becomes even more valuable after an iteration or two when the users realize that their feedback is being included in the solution. This increases their motivation and strengthens the collaboration of the team, which helps the solution stay more closely aligned with the business need. Now, on a slightly different note, here is a now famous quote from Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn. "If you are not completely embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late." Now, this quote can be considered a bit controversial, but it attempts to highlight the importance of launching a product and new features and then iterating, rather than taking additional time to try to make it perfect before launch. And this is a good contrast between the way that Waterfall used to do things compared to the new Agile approach. So we've covered a lot of ground in this session, from why Agile is a good approach for developing software today, to the principles from the manifestos that help define the Agile movement, to what it actually means to work in an Agile way. So that's it for this session on why use Agile. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.